Hello and welcome to this video where I'm going to talk you through the idea of prototyping, modeling, and testing, which is one of those key headings we have in our folios, and what it can actually look like. The idea that we need to understand is that there is no perfect answer to what should go in this section. What we want to see is what is relevant to your specific project. So what I'm going to talk to you about is a range of different prototyping and testing techniques that are suitable to projects in timber. I'll talk a little bit about the importance of why we do this prototyping and modeling and testing. We'll then look at, and you'll probably be able to see fairly clearly how that forms a really close relationship between the research you've done, the prototyping process, and your finished project. So there's a three-way link there. And hopefully by the end of this, you know exactly what you should do in terms of going forward to prepare your own prototypes, testings, or models, or to document it appropriately in your portfolio. So let's get started. In this broad area of prototyping and testing, I really look at these five main things: digital models, virtual reality, 3D printing. Those three fit together really well because you just do the work once in CAD, SketchUp, for example, and with a few extra bits of software and a little bit of extra work, you can tick off all three of them. The fourth one there is experimentation, and the final is jig creation. Anything that fits into those categories is appropriate to appear in your portfolio under this general heading of testing, modeling, and prototyping. The question that I ask myself most regularly, and the question that students ask me most regularly, is what should I actually test? Or what do I need to prototype in order to tick this box in the folio? And to those students, I would say you're attacking this from the wrong perspective. Don't look at it in terms of what do I need to do to tick this off in the folio. Instead, look at your project and say, what do I still need to know or test that I don't already know and that I'm not 100% locked in on? Because that's where the answer falls in terms of what should I test or what should I prototype. And it starts with me looking at my project plans. Now, in this case, I'm looking at a dartboard cabinet that I've drawn up, and I've got a whole heap of different means in there, different techniques, etc. If I showed this to any woodworker, yourself, another student, a Year 9 student versus a Year 12 student, another timber teacher, everyone's going to have a few questions running through their head. Questions like, how are they going to do this? What should we do here? Is there a better way we could do that? I wonder how I could do that part. And those are the sorts of questions that start the process of thinking about what should I test or what should I prototype. Now, in this particular project, I've pointed out four main areas. I've got a drawer, and my first question would be, what join am I going to use? How am I going to join the parts of the drawer together so that I have a nice sturdy drawer, so that I've demonstrated the difficulty of the project, so that I demonstrate a range of skills, but also so that I balance out with good quality. I might also be looking at the inlay on the very front of that drawer. And my question might be, how do I actually put an inlay in the drawer? What types of inlays can I put in a drawer? And when I start asking these questions, rather than just going to Google, conducting research, and just doing what someone else tells me, the prototyping and testing phase of your project is where you get to actually learn by doing. So in the case here, I'm going to say, how do we stain timber? Because obviously in this project, I've got a dark drawer front, dark frames on the doors, and a dark top. They are definitely designed intentionally to be stained so that my students making the dartboard cabinet can learn about staining. But the question is, how do I stain timber evenly to get that even color without getting any blotches or uneven color spreading. And the process would be that I first start with a little bit of research to learn the different ways that I can stain timber. And there's no one way. There are lots of different ways. Lots of timber experts have their own answers. Some people talk about using preconditioners on your timber. Some people talk about applying it with a rag, while other people will talk about applying it with steel wool. There's a whole heap of different options there. The second part is to then conduct some sample tests. And this is where we would go and get some timber from the workshop, some offcuts, for example, and we would test all of the different methods that we'd found in our research on how to appropriately apply stain to timber. We'd then look at those samples and say, which one do we think was the best? And then we make a decision about what method are we going to use. So that's the process I'd follow. Look at my project and ask the questions, how will I, how can I, how should I, how do you, what should I? Then go and conduct a small bit of research to learn the different ways that it could be done, and then test it. In terms of what it would look like in the folio, I would kind of write it like a science experiment. And there are some pretty clear headings that I've taken straight from my experience as a student doing science. I've left out the hypothesis because it's not an unknown. I could include it, but for me, it's not that important. Instead, I'm looking at what am I trying to find out? That's my aim. What materials, chemicals, equipment, etc. am I going to use for this test? I'd list that all under the materials heading. Then I would write the process that I plan to follow. Now, if I'm planning to test 3 different methods of applying stain, then I would have 3 different methods written out, all next to each other under the method. So method 1, method 2, method 3. And then I would have my results underneath them. What were the results from method 1? What were the results from method 2? What were the results from method 3? Now, for us in a timber project, learning about staining, the results are probably going to be best presented as a picture, the picture of the test that you did. And then that conclusion that you would write would be where you start to say, did I get the results that I was looking for? What did I learn along the way? Was I happy with the results that I found? And out of all the different options that I tested, which method or which materials or which equipment am I going to be using based on what I found in this test? So it's an evaluation of the test and a selection and justification of the method that I plan to use. And you've heard me talk about selection and justification in the folios previously. So here's what it could look like in practice. Test 1 was I'm going to use this wipe-on polyurethane finish to see what gets me the best quality finish. And on the right, you can see the result of the product. It's a clear finish, looks a little bit dirty maybe, but seems to be evenly applied. The second option was a tinted stain, and you can see it's quite blotchy. It's highlighted all the scratches and damages and blemishes in my timber. Not a great result compared to option number 1. And then option 3 was a Scandinavian oil, which is slightly tinted oil. And it's a little bit darker, maybe a little bit less evenly applied than the wipe-on poly, but certainly better than the stain. When I compare the 3 against each other, it's pretty clear that if I was looking for a nice clean project, I'd go for option 1. And that's sort of the process that I would follow. And then I'd follow that up with a little paragraph underneath that does that conclusion of what did I learn? What did I decide? What are the reasons for that, etc. Moving forward, one of the other methods of testing and prototyping I spoke about was 3D printing. This is where you get your SketchUp model that you're creating anyway, and you import it into 3D printing software, and then print it on the 3D printer. Now, this sample here, I've only got a screenshot of 3D printing software because I didn't actually print it. As you can see, it would have taken 12 hours and 5 minutes to print. But I've got it in there, and I could have printed it, and I could actually hand in that 3D printed model with my project to help support my portfolio. So my portfolio isn't just paper, it can be samples of my tests as well. And if I go back to these tests that I conducted on the different finishes, I could have included those samples as well. Because every bit of evidence that you can provide is an opportunity for you to get marks to prove that you did do testing and prototyping. The other option here that I've spoken about is jigs and the creation of a jig. Now, a jig is essentially, as you can see on the screen here, a jumble of timber that doesn't really make much sense to anyone. But when you explain what it is, you will find that the jig is a method of you being able to repeat something with the exact same results over and over. It's a template. It's a template that helps make sure that you get what you want out of your production processes. Now, in this example here, you can see that there are some timber edges, and it looks like there's a little almost curvy routed line that's been cut out of the plywood there. This jig is designed to get that exact shape replicated on multiple pieces of timber because it forms a really significant part of one of the students' projects. And to make sure that their project works, they need it to be exactly the same on the left and the right. And so therefore they've created a jig to help make sure that was possible. But a jig could be as simple as you setting up a straight edge for the router to follow. A jig could be much more complex like this, or it could be the creation of your own doweling jig, your own dovetailing jig, whatever it might be. Any system that enables you to repeat results in a consistent, high quality way over for your project would fit into this jig creation. And I specifically think about using jigs with routers because I want to make sure that the router goes where I want the router to go. Because routers, if you're not holding them in the right spot, and if you don't have the level of control of an expert woodworker, you might find that the router cuts a very different path to what you ask it to do, unless you have some guiding lines or jigs for it to follow. The final thing that I've got listed here is virtual reality. And I'm not going to play this video for you. I'll include it in the show notes so that if you want to go and watch it, you can. But essentially what you could do is you could take a photo of your living room where the bedside table, or the coffee table that you're designing for your project is going to go. So you take a photo of your empty room and you can import that into SketchUp, and then you could place your model in that room using this idea of virtual reality. You could go even further and put it into 3D glasses, where you are then able to walk around the digital model and look at it from all sorts of angles in a online showroom as a method of displaying your work and testing to make sure it does look like what you want it to look like. Again, with all of these things that I've shown you, you would use the experimentation format. What were you trying to achieve? What process did you go through? What were the results? How successful were they? And what did you learn that you can use to improve your project? That's the end of my video on testing, prototyping, and modeling. There are many, many, many more ways that you could test things, prototype things, or model things for your projects. But what I've shown you are some of the simpler and also some of the more complex options that are available for you that would be fairly consistently used across timber projects for students, particularly working in a school environment where you don't have the luxury of CNC equipment to get things perfect for you. So testing and prototyping is a really important part of that process. I hope that's helpful for you, and I encourage you then to go back and look at some of the A-level samples that we've got in the classroom around what this could look like in terms of a page in your portfolio as well. Thanks very much for your time.